as he makes his way to the stage.
Oh, thanks, guys. So I've been pastor for almost 10 years, and that stuff still makes me feel really uncomfortable. I'm just going to lie, but I am so grateful to pastor this church. Pastoring this church has made raising children seem very easy. And so I'm grateful for that, but it is one of the greatest joys of my life. And so I just want to say thank you for allowing me and allowing our team to be your pastors. It is our great honor. So give yourselves a round of applause for that. Good morning. I don't ever see church news until I step on stage, so I had no idea that was going to happen, but that was really sweet. So grateful to be with you guys. Happy Sunday. My name is Craig. I'm one of the pastors on staff here if you're new. So happy that you decided to join us today. Let me just kind of quickly reiterate a few of the things that Deanna said in church news. So 2 weeks from today, November 13th, is our annual Kingdom Offering. This is a big deal in the life of our church. You guys always show up in such amazing ways. One of the cultural values of our church is that we're gifted to give. So we talk about money a lot. It's a big deal to us because we know the difference it can make when the church taps into generosity. If you're new here and you're wondering what in the world the Kingdom Builders is, simply put, it's this. Kingdom Builders, it's not an initiative. It's not something that we do per se, but Kingdom Builders are an amazing group of people that call Church of the Four Corners their home. They are a group of people, and what makes them so amazing is that not only do they tithe to their local storehouse, they give over and above that tithe to meet kingdom needs. And as she said, we've got all the list of needs on our website. We do have like physical hard copies if you're more tactile like me, available at the welcome desk if you'd like to take advantage of one of those. But there are 3 categories of needs that we meet through Kingdom Builders. The first is future Christian leaders and church plants. Second, global needs. And thirdly, local needs. And I want to just quickly highlight one need in particular that we believe will be able to financially fund through the giving that will take place 2 weeks from today. And it's our global missions work happening in the country of Nicaragua. So 6 days from today, 10 of you on your own dime are flying to the country of Nicaragua. And what you're going to be doing over the next week when you arrive is nothing short of amazing. In 1 week, you're going to build a 324 square foot home, which doesn't seem like a lot to us in our kind of like Americanized life, although tiny homes are very in vogue right now. But keep in mind, we're building a house for someone who is homeless. That we will literally be rescuing someone out of abject poverty and giving them a safe place to live. Not only will we be doing that, there'll be medical clinics to meet people's basic human needs. You can do all of that for $2,500. In addition, for only $600 more, I feel like I'm giving an infomercial right now, for 6 easy installments of $99.99 for $600. In addition to that, we can provide a year of theological and leadership training for a local pastor in that community. How amazing is that, church? Is that not awesome? It's incredible. We get to do all of that, and we can fund it through the giving that will take place. And so here's what we're saying. We're not going to tell you what to give, but we always will ask, would you ask God how he would have you respond? And then just be obedient to that number. So be praying now 2 weeks from today. Sound good? We awake? You with me? All right, here we go. All right, we're in week number 7 of our series, He Lives. And once again, next Sunday, you're not going to want to miss you know how like the church is always like behind on things a little bit? We're just a little bit late to the game. We thought it'd be appropriate now that Halloween is over to do a series on monsters, or it will be over by the time we start. But we're going to do this 3-week series, I See Monsters, and it's going to be so good. And this thought occurred to me this morning. Like, none of us have any excuse to not be at church next Sunday. It will literally be probably the last time in our lives, now that they passed the bill and daylight savings is going away, which is so stupid. But It's going to be the last time in our lives next Sunday that an hour of sleep magically shows up. Have you thought about that? Like one day my grandkids are going to ask me, what was that like to go to sleep and just be given an extra hour? Because they're going to have no idea. We get to experience it one more time next Sunday. So don't sleep in. Come hang with us. But for today, we're going to jump in right where Andrew left off. Did Andrew not do a phenomenal job last Sunday? Holy cow. My man was throwing 7 kinds of smoke. Teaching through this passage of where Jesus, he just levels the playing field in one moment. Jesus shows us how the body of Christ, the church, can have radical unity despite our radical differences, but it's only possible one way, when we will adopt the posture and humility of a servant. And so the one guy that didn't have to wash feet lowers himself, washes feet, and changes the game. And so that's what we're going to pick up this morning. John 13, starting in verse number 21. John writes this: after he had said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit. So right out of the gate this morning, all of us are already asking the exact same question. And that question is, what did Jesus say? Right? Because I don't know about you. I literally can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday. And I knew I was going to make that statement, so I have been thinking for the last 2 hours of what I had for lunch yesterday and still can't figure it out. I can't remember my kids' birthdays half the time. Like I've got 2, all I know is that Liam and Wally were born 9 days apart in the month of November, and I'm expected to remember both of those dates? Like, am I a computer? Am I a stick of RAM? Like let alone, remember what Jesus said. Jordan, I'm so glad you like that. Am I supposed to remember, what Jesus said in Andrew's? Is anyone else like that? Okay, I didn't think I'm alone here. So let's do this. Let's, travel back in time to last Sunday. We're going to rewind, and I want to take us back to verse number 18 so that we can fully understand why Jesus is troubled in spirit. So let's start there. John 13, verse 18. Jesus says this: I am not referring to all of you. I know those I have chosen, but this is to fulfill this passage of Scripture. He who shared my bread has turned against me. So this is a universal principle that was true in antiquity just as much as it is true today, that betrayal hurts. But here's the deal. It's one thing to be betrayed by some rando, to be betrayed by an acquaintance or someone that you work with but aren't close to. It's something else entirely to be betrayed by a friend. There are levels here. There's something else entirely to be betrayed by someone that you invited into your life, that you shared a table with, that you broke bread with. There's an intimacy when you enter into my home. This is what Jesus is saying when he says this: he who has shared my bread has turned against me. And we talk about this quite a bit with our staff, and even we mentioned this a couple weeks ago at our leaders' night, that the call to pastor, the call to lead at any capacity is a call to suffer. It's a call to suffer. And that's the great paradox, is it not? That the only way you can lead people or pastor people or disciple people well is by sharing bread with them. But yet the moment you share bread, you have to extend the ability for them to hurt you. And not all the time, but sometimes they will. That trust will be broken. That betrayal will occur. I mean, isn't this what Jesus he was talking about this when he mentioned in Matthew chapter 10, which is like the world's worst pep talk before sending out your people. Hey guys, good news, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Just pretend that was just been told to you. It's like, did you switch that or sheep among wolves? Could you imagine William Wallace saying that to his warriors? Hey, good news, gentlemen, sheep among wolves, let's go. Like, he's literally telling his disciples, the world is going to devour you. They're going to abuse you. They're going to slander you. They're going to betray you. And that's why he concludes this thought in Matthew 10 by saying, this is why you need to be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. The Craig paraphrase, meaning we've got to learn how to have really thick skin, all the while maintaining a tender and compassionate heart. Jesus says that one of my friends, someone I opened up my home and we broke bread together, he's betrayed me, verse 19. And I'm telling you now, before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe that I am who I am. Very truly, I tell you, whoever accepts anyone I send accepts me, and whoever accepts me accepts the one who sent me. Jesus is looking around at a circle of men who are disciples, but will soon become apostles. They're not yet, but they will be, because apostle means someone who is sent out. And essentially, kind of the implicit point that Jesus is making here is that people like Judas don't get to win. That the gospel will still be spread. The church will still be established. The kingdom will still reign wherever we go. And when I send you out, for those who accept you, they will also accept me. But for those who reject you, Judas, awkward. Like, they're not only rejecting me, they actually will reject my Father. So verse 21, where we first began. After he said this, so kind of all of that's the table being set. Jesus was troubled in spirit, and he testified, very truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me. Now don't miss what happens in verse 22. It's so subtle, but it's profound in its significance. And after saying this, verse 22, his disciples stared at one another at a loss to know which of them he meant. So guys, think about for a moment what this means. Let's collectively put on our critical thinking caps. What does this mean? What is this one verse showing us this morning? Isn't it telling that when Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me, that like collectively the disciples weren't all like, oh, you mean Judas, right? like clearly, yeah, looking around the room, that it's got to be him because that dude's sketch, right? He's like our treasurer, got like $100 bills hanging out of his pocket. We're all wearing burlap, and that dude's rolling in like a Louis Vuitton robe. Like someone's gonna betray, it's him. Like clearly he's your guy. It's like that classic SNL sketch. I saw it this week where Patrick Swayze and Chris Farley are both auditioning for Chippendales. Seen that? And like, it's like Swayze in his prime, you know, he's like ripped and he's like svelte, dude looks great. And Chris Farley looks like Chris Farley, okay? And they're both like have their shirts off, and like Swayze's like doing his thing, and then Chris Farley is also doing his thing, and the judges are like, oh, we just don't know what to do. They're both so good. It's like clearly one of these guys does not belong in this arena here. Like clearly one of them is not made for this context. But that's not the case with Judas. He was not the one that stuck out like a sore thumb. Judas was not the prime candidate for who would possibly betray Jesus. And the implications of this should horrify us, church. Because what this shows us is that there was zero outward discernible difference between the betrayer of Jesus Christ and the men who would go on to build the church. Zero. Now, Jesus knew. He knew all along. He knew from the very beginning. But the disciples had no clue. What a humbling reminder for the rest of us of just how quickly we can learn how to chameleon and play the game. That we show up and we go through the motions, we do the bare minimum, we kind of put on our costume and our mask to play church and sing the songs and say that's, oh, so good, right at the right point in the message, and we just kind of move on, but yet all along internally we are completely closed off to the work of Jesus in our lives. No one played the game better than Judas. And this happened in Jesus' circle. Are we too naive to believe that it doesn't happen here? Every week? Verse 23. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. I want to just take a moment and talk about that. Because this is actually the very first time throughout the Gospel of John, in chapter 13, that John identifies himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. Interesting little factoid, John never claims to be the author of the Gospel of John. There's nowhere in there that he said, like, unlike Paul in many of his epistles, he's like, I, Paul, an apostle of Christ. John never does that. And the way that we determine his authorship is by also different variables of contextual clues and much of the writings of the patristics, which is the early church in the first several centuries and church tradition. And when you pull all of that together, it becomes overwhelmingly clear that John is the author of the Gospel of John. But he never comes out and just says it. Instead, he refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. Is there anyone in your life when you say who, they correct you and say, whom? John was that guy. And it's interesting as like modern readers, we hear that phrase, that self-identification as the disciple whom Jesus loved. And we hear that and we're like, a little braggy, aren't we, John? It's like someone thinks very highly of themselves. And it seems a little like arrogant, a little boastful, but here's what's actually happening. So for all of us, the easiest and the primary way that we identify ourselves is through our name, right? So if we go out and we create something, we build something, let's say you write a song or you patent an invention, you create a piece of art or a graphic, the very first thing we do is we copyright it and put our name on it. Here's what we have to understand. For John, the worth of being loved by Jesus far outweighed the value of his own name. You could go up to him and be like, hey, John, right? He's like, listen, I'm just someone that Jesus knows who I am and he loves me. Like, I was invited into his inner circle. That there is the most remarkable, the most substantial, the most significant thing about my life is that Jesus knows me and loves me still. So what's easily seen as this kind of haughty or arrogant remark, it's actually one birth of deep humility. Verse 24. So Simon Peter motioned to this disciple and said, and I love this because I can totally see Laura doing this to me at a dinner party. So here's like John and Jesus sitting next to each other, and across the table somewhere, Peter, he's like, hey, psst, psst, John, psst, ask him which one he means. You have like a friend or a significant other, like a spouse, like always like psst, in the middle of the movie. What did he just say? I thought she was dead. It's like, psst, ask him what he means. And John's like, no, be cool. Like, fine, all right. And then he kind of, so Jesus. Like, he leans back. And he says, Lord, who is it? Who's the one that will betray you? And Jesus answered. Now, this is going to seem like a small detail, but this is huge. Keep in mind, when Jesus answers in verse 26, this is not a public statement. This is not something that he says in front of the entire group. This is a private comment made only to John in response to his question. He says, it is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish. Then, dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. I want to read that last verse one more time, but I want to go back and I want to read it to you in the King James Version, one of the earliest, third earliest English translation of the Bible. Verse 26. So in response to the question, who is it that will betray you? Jesus answered, he it is to whom I shall give a, what's that word? Sop. When I have dipped it. And when he dipped the sop, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. So whether you realize it or not, we are familiar with this term sop. Because when something is soaking wet, we would say it's sopping wet. Yeah. So by definition, a sop was a piece of bread or toast that was then dripped in some kind of liquid. That liquid could be like a beverage or it could even be food until that bread and toast would be saturated. And so we're told that Jesus, over a meal, now this looks like wine, but this, in more reality, this would have been probably a soup or a stew or something hearty. We're told he dips the sop, he saturates it, and in front of everyone, he extends it towards Judas. Now, if you're anything like me, I spent my entire life reading this story and interpreting this as a way that, like, Jesus is alienating Judas, that he is making an example of Judas. But don't forget, the disciples have no idea what's going on. The only person who knows that Judas is the betrayer is John. We know this to be true because at the very end of the text, when Judas leaves, the disciples are all like, I wonder where Judas is going. Maybe there's events that need to be taken care of. No one has any idea what's happening except for one. So Jesus here, he isn't making an example of Judas, church. He's honoring him. In this culture, when you would have a distinguished guest at your party, it was customary for the host to dip the sop and then serve that guest in front of everyone else. It would be like the modern day equivalent of giving a toast. I was thought of that scene in The Godfather 2, where Michael Corleone, in the big party, everyone's around, and he takes Fredo, and he kisses him in front of everyone, and he's like, I know it was you. No one else knows, but he knows. And he extends the sop to Judas. So once again, could we just appreciate together the significance of this moment happening before everyone, that in this moment, only Jesus, Judas, and John actually know what's happening. Jesus knows who Judas is. He knows that he's not his friend. In fact, he's his enemy. But how does Jesus respond? He shows him kindness and love. It harkens back to our message a month ago, the Palm Sunday message, the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, that it shows us that Jesus would rather die than kill his enemies. It shows us that Jesus would speak very literally on the Sermon on the Mount when he said, anyone who would be my follower will live different, that we won't hate those who hate us, but rather we'll love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. In doing this act, Jesus addresses a question that haunts every one of us as followers of Jesus. That question being, how do we overcome the seemingly insurmountable evil of the world? The evil that's all around us, the evil that surrounds us at every turn. Jesus answers the question, we overcome evil with good. We overcome evil with love. That we overcome evil with kindness. It's as if Jesus creates one final moment for Judas to repent. Even now, he's still advocating for his enemy. And he extends the sop, and the question is, will he receive it? Will he receive the sop, and in doing so, betray the man that he has seen heal the sick? And in doing so, betray the man that he's seen cast out demons, to love the poor, the widow, the orphan, the marginalized? Will he betray a man that even in his own heart of hearts he knows to be good, but not just good? God. Verse 27. As soon as Judas, would you say those next three words with me, took the bread, Satan entered into him. See, the moment that Judas receives the sop, it becomes clear that his heart is impervious, completely resistant to the appeal of love. Listen, what I'm about to say is going to be really hard for some of you to hear. Because it would be very easy for me to stand on the stage and hold the microphone and just give you platitudes that are exciting and easy to hear. Platitudes like, it doesn't matter what you do, you'll never be too far gone. Like, it doesn't matter what you do, you can never run too far away. But here's the reality. What the story of Judas shows is that for some of us, and there's only a kind of a handful of examples of this throughout the scripture, they are too far gone. That they do allow their heart to become in a place that is so callous, so filled with hatred and animosity towards God, that their heart becomes completely hardened. And that the moment this happens, we're told that Satan enters into him. Isn't it interesting? If you look back at the beginning of John 13, verse 2, it says, Satan planted the idea in Judas's heart to betray Jesus. That's verse 2. Verse 27, he actually does it. And the moment he walked out, it was as if he spiritually died. Satan enters into him, and he became nothing more than a puppet for Satan's desires. I mean, isn't this what James 1:14 and 15 talks about? But each person is tempted when they're dragged away by their own evil desires and enticed. Like, this is how the enemy comes against us. He attacks your own desires. He doesn't custom create a plan to destroy your life. He identifies what's already at work in you. He finds your greatest weakness. He finds the chink in your armor. He finds your vulnerability, and he exploits you there. But temptation isn't sin. Jesus was tempted. To have the thought wasn't the sin, but it goes on. Once desire as conceived, it gives birth to sin. But even here, it's not too late. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. You are looking at a chief sinner on this stage. We all blow it. We all mess up. We all fall short. We all sin. But then it continues. When sin is full grown, it gives birth to what? Death. Church, this is why we have to hate our sin. This is why we can't just be the type of church that only talks about God's abounding love and grace, but we actually have to give sin a name and call it what it is. This is why we have to strive for holiness. This is why we can't allow pet sins to remain in our lives. This is why we have to vehemently hate and fight the work of the enemy coming against our souls, because the cost is death. When our sin becomes full grown, we die. So Jesus told him, what you are about to do quickly. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. Since Judas had charge of the money, once again, no one knows, guys. No one understands the significance of this moment. Some thought Jesus was just telling him to buy what was needed for the festival or to give something to the poor. And as soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out. And if nothing else, to describe the condition of his soul, we're given the detail. And it was night. So here's what I want to do. I want to end service as we have been. We're going to conclude with communion, because communion gives us the opportunity to reflect on the person of Jesus, the work of Jesus, where we need more of Jesus in our life. However, this morning I want to do communion a little different. And so we're going to play a song. We're going to pass the elements, but I'm going to ask that you do not take the elements yet, because then I'm going to pop back up and I'm going to lead us in communion together. So let's pass out the elements now. Thanks.